Boys and girls, so good to see you back from Thanksgiving break. I wanted to revisit our lesson from before Thanksgiving, and we're going to use this with the factor of 8. So we're using the distributive property by using our multiplication factor of 8 today. So let's take a look. Just a reminder, we need to remember that we have our multiplication sentence. Our first factor tells us how many rows or how many groups we have. Our second factor is going to tell us how many are in each group or in each row. And remember, you could also use this for area, which would mean that you would be counting square units. We also have our product, which would be our total number of objects put together once we've counted all the objects in the group. We can also think about our multiples of 4 to help us with our multiples of 8. So our multiples of 4, we have 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, 32, 36, 40, which would be 10 times 4, and one more group of 4 would be 11 groups of 4, making 44. So these are our multiples of 4. Now within our multiples of 4, we also have multiples of 8. And if we double our multiples of 4, we would get multiples of 8. So multiples of 8, you'll notice here, we would have 8. Here's 8, 8, 16, 16, 24, 24, 32, 32, 40, 40, and this would continue on until we could no longer count. So within your multiples of 4, you'll notice every second multiple in your multiples of 4 is going to be a multiple of 8. So if I double my multiple of 4 to get my multiple of 8, 1 times 4 is 4, but one group of 8 is 8. Two groups of 4 is 8. Two groups of 8 is 16. So if we double these, we would have two groups of 4 twice, basically, because that's what 8 is. It's a 4 and a 4. So we can think of multiples of 4 to help us use our multiples of 8 or find our multiples of 8 as we skip count by 8s. Now let's take a look at our strategy that we were using before Thanksgiving. We were talking about using two smaller facts, and actually you could have as many facts as you want as long as you break it down into smaller equivalent pieces or equal rows, and you can use your smaller facts to find the larger fact. So let's just say, for example, we have 4 rows with 4 in each row. Well, if we were to add another 4 rows to that array, how many rows would we have? Well, we'd have another 4 rows of 4, and together that would mean that we would have 8 rows of 4. Now the total number of objects that we have would increase and double by 2. So to look at that, we're breaking up the 4 rows and the 4 rows to make the 8 rows, as you notice here. And that 8 times 4 is going to be 32 objects because we took the 16 from 4 times 4 and the 16 from 4 times 4 and added them together. So our first equation or expression was 4 times 4. Our second array or expression is going to be 4 times 4. And when we put these together, we're going to use that plus symbol to take the 4 times 4 is 16 and 4 times 4 is 16, and that's going to give us our 32 objects. Let's practice again. We have 8 rows now with 6 in each row. we're going to break up the 8 rows. As you notice, it's circled here. And there are many different ways that we could break this up, but I want to start off with, let's do 4 rows and 4 rows. That means that the first factor in each one of our smaller arrays is going to be 4 times 6, which is 24. And the second array is going to be 4 times 6, and that's also going to equal 24. And when I put that 24 and 24 together, 20 and 20 is 40, and 4 and 4 is 8, and together they make 48. So our product is 48. Now, what if I wanted to separate the array or larger array a little differently? I could do that by moving my line up 1 more row, and now I have 3 rows of 6, and if I add 6 plus 6 plus 6, that's going to give me 18, and then I have 5 rows of 6 on the bottom, and you notice that the second factor stays the same, which is 6, because we haven't broken up our columns, we've just broken up our rows. And so if we know 5 times 6, which we should if we count by 5s, we know that that's going to be 30. And 30 and 18 is going to give me 48. Another way we could break this up is we can move our dividing line here, and we would have 2 rows of 6, which makes 12, and 6 rows of 6, which makes 36. And when you add 36 and 12 together, 30 and 10 is 40, and 6 and 2 makes 8, and that's still going to give us 48. So there are still 48 objects in the big array. We're just breaking it down to help us find from smaller parts the larger amount or the total objects in the large array or in all the rows. So don't forget, we can put that and make it into a plus sign because we're adding the smaller array total to the smaller array total to get the larger array's total, which is 48 total. Now let's take a look at our assignment for today. You're going to need your Envision hardback book, a piece of paper, and maybe actually a couple of pieces of paper because you're going to need to draw arrays. So let's take a look at our assignment for today.
Hi boys and girls, it's Miss Jaramillo, and it's so good to have you back after our Thanksgiving break. So we're going to take a look at our factor of 8. So 8 is being one of the factors of our multiplication sentence. So as you remember, before we went on break, we were talking about the distributive property and how to take one of the factors and break it down into 2 addends to make our multiplication sentence easier to solve for. So I'm going to start you off with our assignment, and it's going to start off with number 1, and you have 8 times 7, and 8 times 7, our 8 tells us how many rows or groups we have, and our 7 tells us how many are in each row or in each group. I'm going to use an array to show 8 times 7. So I'm just going to grab my paper here, pull it off to the side. Please make sure to have your name, date, and page number here. Super important to start off with that. Name, date, and page number. And our number 1 is 8 rows with 7 in each row, and we're using the distributive property or the break apart strategy to help us solve for 8 times 7. So we could add 7 or 8 groups of 7. We could add 7 plus 7 plus 7 plus 7 8 times, and we would get our product. Or we could count by multiples of 7 8 times. But this is another strategy of using 2 multiplication sentences to help you solve and break it down into 2 smaller arrays. So we have 8 rows. And I'm just going to use my lines here on my blue paper as my rows. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and I have 7 in each row. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I'm just going to fill these in now that I have my first row. If you keep them lined up in columns, you won't have any problems making sure that you have 7 in each row if you keep them lined up. Now, I would myself like to break these up as a 4 rows and a 4 rows. Now, to do that, I'm going to draw my line down the middle because 4 and 4 is half of 8. So, if I were to draw my line right here, this tells me I have 4 rows on the top and 4 rows on the bottom. So when I write a multiplication sentence for each of these smaller parts, it's going to look like this. My first factor is going to be 4 because I have 4 rows and 4 rows. 4 rows of what? 4 rows of 7. That's for this part right here. And I have another 4 rows of 7 right there. I still have my 8 rows of 7, but I'm breaking it down to help me solve it. So I'm going to add these together. 4 rows of 7 and 4 rows of 7. Now, 4 rows of 7 is 28, and another 4 rows of 7 would be 28, and 20 and 20 is 40, and 8 and 8 is 16, so 40 and 16 would give me 56. So my product for 8 times 7 is going to be 56. Number 2 is 8 rows with 4 in each row. So same number of rows. I'm going to skip a line. I'm going to put a number 2 here. I have 8 times 4. So I have 8 rows. I'm going to break this up as 5 and 3 this time. Let's change it up a little bit. I like 5 because we know our 5s fairly quickly and easily, and it makes it much easier to work with. So let's try 5 and 3 this time. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows, and 1, 2, 3 rows. And I have 4 in each row. So now that I know how many rows I have, and how many are in each row, now I can write 2 smaller expressions to go with 8 times 4. So I have 5 rows. That's my first factor because that tells me how many groups or rows I have, and that tells me how I broke this up. 5 rows and 3 rows. So I have 5 rows of 4, and I could just write this under here as 5 times 4. And I have 3 rows of 4. 1, 2, 3, and there's 4 rows in each, so I can add that to 3 times 4, and when I add 5 times 4 is 20, with 3 times 4 is 12, together there's 20 here, and there's 12 here, and together when I add 20 plus 12, that is going to give me 32. So I started you off with number 1 and 2. I'm not going to have you do an array for each of these problems, but I will give you the ones that I do want to see arrays for. Let's look at numbers 3. So if you could do an array for number 3, number 5. I think for 4 and 6, you guys can solve those either by counting by multiples of 3 or knowing your multiples of 10. Number 7 says, how could the fact 5 times 8 equal 40 help you find 8 times 8? Well, let's think about what 5 rows of 8 is going to be. And how many more rows of 8 are you going to need to come up with 8 rows of 8 from the 5 rows of 8? So for number 7, you definitely need to draw yourself an array because you need to see how many more rows of 8 that you need to add on to make 8 rows of 8. So number 7 and 8, number 7 and 8 are all important to use. And number 9, you need to draw. 10, 15, 22. Actually, for number 5, you did number 24. So, I think I will leave off with those are the ones that you're going to do today in your book. You're going to do, now that you're going to do, finish up 1 through 9. The ones that you need to do arrays for are going to be circled. You need to do number 10, 15 as an array, 22, and 24 as an array. So those are the only ones that you have to draw arrays for. The rest, I believe, you can kind of solve on your own without having to draw arrays or necessarily use a lot of you can use other strategies, basically what I'm saying. I'm also going to stop you at number 31. So your assignment is going to be 1 through 31. And for the ones that are circled here, and I have those in the lesson plan for today, you are going to do arrays for 3, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 15, 22, and 24. So those are the ones that you're going to need to draw arrays for, and number 31 also. Don't forget that when you are critiquing reasoning, you need to explain whether you agree or not and explain why or why not. Do you agree with that? And remember, double means make it twice. When you double something, you are going to do it twice. So think about if you double 2 times 8, what's that going to look like when you double it? So, if you have any other questions, don't hesitate to put them in Schoology, and we will be meeting tomorrow to discuss and go over our assignment for today. Have a great Monday, guys, and time to get back to work after Thanksgiving, and we'll be almost there to Christmas, so hang in there.